All right, good morning. I'm vertically challenged, but you guys have a nice stage here, so hopefully you can still see me if I get closer to you. My name is Rachel Gilmore. I'm the director of New and Vital Faith here at the Desert Southwest Annual Conference. And people say, what does that mean? What do you do? Where are our apportionment dollars going? So I have two main roles in the conference. One is to start new faith communities, new churches, and the other is to revitalize existing churches. And so sometimes, I don't know about you, but in other places, the first question people have is, why are we starting new churches? Isn't my church good enough? Don't we have enough churches already? Have you ever thought that, heard that? And you might be right, but what I've learned about the North District and this area is you have grown substantially, okay? So I was a history major, social studies education in undergrad, so I did some history on Henderson. Does anyone know the day and year you were founded as a town? Anyone? May 23rd, 1953. And when you were founded back in the 1950s, there were a huge number of people living here. Just around 7,000 people lived in town back then. And so I have, a picture. Okay, this is Henderson. Look, I do all this research for you guys, and it's just fun. Some of you who were there last night are overwhelmed with all the data that I provided, right? But you didn't get to hear this data last night. So, okay, 1953, 7,000 people. Where are we now? Next slide, please, Ryan. Okay, the numbers are really teeny tiny. It's hard to see. But in the year 2000, according to the census, you had grown from 7,000 to 174,000. And now, just 22 years later, you're at 318,000. In the next 10 years, over 350,000 people will live in Henderson. You're the second largest city in all of Nevada. Did you know that? Look at all these people. You're like, yes, I did, Rachel, absolutely. So I think that maybe I'm not here to announce that we're starting a new faith community in Henderson, but if we do, it's probably because, as gorgeous as this sanctuary is, between you and First, you can't house 350,000 people. So we're going to help y'all focus on the 104,000 people that live within a 2.5-mile radius of this building. Look at all these people, right? We have lots of exciting work to do. And so as I thought about your community and all the potential to reach new people, I was reminded of Luke 15 and how it begins. Like, we all know the prodigal son story, you know, the lost son. But how does this series of 3 parables build? What does it have to say to us? So we're going to circle back and go to Luke 15. We have a slide for this. Verse 2, yes. Okay, so the tax collectors, the sinners, were all gathering around to hear Jesus. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus overhears all this grumbling and complaining about the riffraff that Jesus hangs out with. And he responds to that complaint with 3 stories. And so the very first story is the story of the lost sheep, right? How many sheep did the shepherd leave to go find the one? 99, yes. My mom's a Baptist minister, so we might do some call and response here, okay? And if I preach too long, Kathy, you have to say, "Help her Jesus," really loudly, and then I'll know to shut up, okay? So the shepherd leaves his 99 sheep. He goes and finds the one sheep, and then, we have another slide here that talks about the party at the end. Yes, the shepherd calls his friends and neighbors and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep." I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who don't need to repent. So, in this story, the shepherd lost 1% of the flock, right? 1 out of 100. And then the scene intensifies, okay? Because we go from a 1% loss to a 10% loss. The next story is the woman and the lost coin. Suppose a woman has 10 silver coins. She loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost coin. In the same way I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Okay, so we lost 1%. Then we lost 10%. And now we get to the story of the lost son. And the loss is one of two, right? 50%, losing half of what's valuable, precious, worthy. And we've all heard this story before, right? Is this the first time hearing the prodigal son for anyone in this room? No, it's a classic, right? So you all know how it goes. A man has two sons. The younger son says, listen, Pops, you're not dead yet, and I want your money. So could I have my inheritance now? Can you imagine? I have an 11 and 14-year-old child, and if either of them said that to me, my response would not be as loving as the dad's, because in essence, the son was saying, you are dead to me. So you might physically be alive, but I don't care. I'm done with you. Give me what's owed me so I can do what I want with my life. As a parent, I just can't imagine hearing those words. But the dad acquiesces, gives his younger son his entire inheritance. And this is where you guys really threw me for a loop, okay? Because I've preached on this parable in many states, even some other countries. And when we read that the son goes to a distant land, I always reference Vegas, like it's so far away. And if you're gonna go party and go crazy, but Vegas is not a distant land. So what would that be for you? Reno's not far enough away. Would it be like New Orleans for Mardi Gras or Cabo? I don't know. But what the son does, we're gonna go to this next slide. Yes, with some pigs. Okay, so he sets off for a distant country and there squanders his wealth in wild living. You don't know me much, but something I hope you take with you is my love of the Koine Greek, like the original language that the New Testament was written in, because I feel like it's so fascinating and it helps us understand more of what's going on. So when the younger son goes off to Cabo or New Orleans or wherever it is, it says he squanders his wealth. In Greek, the word for squander is right there in the screen, and the way you pronounce it is diascorpizo, I'm like reading it in Greek right now, which means to like scatter with wild abandon. So it's really a bummer that you're so close to Vegas, because I've been staying in the Flamingo the last 3 days and I have not engaged in the activity at the Flamingo, but it really does feel like they are scattering their money all over the place, right? It's just wild abandon and reckless squandering of what they have. So the son does that, and it says that he scatters it in wild living. So the King James version of the Bible translates wild living prodigal living, which is where we get the term prodigal son. In Greek, the word is asotos, okay? Asotos. And it's the adverb of the word asotas, which means not savable. Not savable. So he squanders his wealth in a lifestyle that is beyond salvation. And I don't know what your story is or how you got to be here today, but for some of you, you might have felt like there was a point in your life where you were not savable, where the actions and the choices you were making were so far gone from who you were and what you wanted to be that you were past that point of hope. And so one of my favorite verses, it isn't on a slide for you, but in verse 17, after he squanders all his wealth, he's absolutely broke, famine hits, he ends up on a farm feeding pigs who eat better than he does. He's jealous of their diet, okay? That is the absolute definition of rock bottom, right? And in verse 17, it says, literally, he comes to himself. He comes back to himself and wakes up and says, what am I doing here? Like, even my dad's servants eat better than I do. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell my dad, I messed up. I'm not worthy to be his son anymore. Could he just hire me as a servant so I can eat better than a pig? And that is the farthest you can go from who you want to be and what you want to do. But he comes to himself. he heads back home, and his dad sees him from far off and runs to him and embraces him and tells his servants, go kill a calf. Like, we're going to have the biggest block party we've ever known in this neighborhood. And the son shares his prepared speech. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And it's like the dad doesn't even hear him. He says, quick, put rings on his fingers, give him a robe, let's get ready to party. And we all celebrate, right? As Christians, we're like, this is the story, hooray. The son who was lost has been found. But in Jewish rabbinic tradition, when you tell a parable, the goal, the point of the parable is how it ends. And so what's sad, what we don't realize as Christians, steeped in Methodism forever, is that these three parables show us at the end of the story, there's still a lost son. Not everyone is found. Do you ever think about it like that? That maybe the one who was lost is not the one who physically left home because he returned, but it's the elder brother? I mean, we heard that in our scripture, but we're going to put it up here again to see this brother's response. Because, okay, can you imagine, as the older brother, he's still out working in the fields, and he hears music, and he smells the barbecue, and he's like, what's going on? And so he heads back, and people are dancing, all the trucks are pulling into the parking lot and tailgating, and he asks the servant, hey, what's the party for? And the servant says, oh, your little brother came home, and we're all having a party. We killed a big calf, which is worth like a year's worth of wages. Like, this is an expensive meal. To say the older son is livid is like an understatement, right? Because he refuses to go into the party, and when his dad comes out and begs, please come, join us, celebrate, his response is, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. So the older son is saying, in essence, I've been like a servant to you, not a son. I've been a servant all these years. I've never disobeyed you. I've done everything right. I've been perfectly obedient. Yet you never even gave me a goat to celebrate with my friends. Like, I don't even get a goat for years and years of faithfulness. But when this son of yours, so he does not say when my brother, he's dead in his relationship to his brother now. He says, when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, kind of interesting how the older brother assumes he knows what the Asotos living entailed. But when he comes home, you killed a fattened calf for him. We'll go to the next slide. Yep, my son, the father said, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. The story ends with the older brother outside, angry and bitter and resentful. Dead not only in his relationship to his brother, but also to his father, who he does not speak to as a father or want to be in relationship with. And so for me, like I look at the church and I see the decline. We've all seen decline in churches, right? This is nothing new. And I get asked all the time, Rachel, your job is to help us revitalize churches. How do we do that? Well, I think it takes two steps. Number one, we have to remember how to party. Really party. And I know we're having a potluck. I can't tell you how excited I am about that. But if we be meetin', we be eatin' as Methodists is great, and I am a big fan of all the carbs that await us. But the reason why you're gathering to party is a big deal too. Are we gathering to celebrate people who are lost who have been found in a relationship with God? We've lost our ability to party because I think a lot of us have ended up like the older son, right? I don't know about you, but I grew up in the church. Both my dad was a Navy chaplain, Methodist. My mom's a Baptist minister. So I lived and breathed church. My husband, who's also a pastor, came to Christ at 18 years old when he got a DUI and had a lot of time at home to go to Bible study. So he reads the story of the prodigal son differently than I do. He's more of that younger brother, and I'm the older brother who's like, listen, I've never even smoked a cigarette. I mean, I haven't done drugs. I was in youth group. I led youth retreats. I'm in ministry. And all these people coming in here and wanting to sit in my pew and park in my parking spot and take my position on trustees or sing my solo in the choir. right? Has it ever been like that where we say we want to welcome people in, we want new people, but we want them to come in and sit in their place because I got here first, buddy, so get in line, right? Let's have a little come to Jesus moment where we say we want to revitalize churches if they fit in the system and no fattened calves are killed until I get my goat. That's our reality. So we're not really in a party mood, and because we don't really want to party and celebrate all these lost people being found and having more attention on them than we deserve, but we don't even want to go out and look for the lost. I mean, when you see what the elder son says to his dad, he says, listen, I've done everything right, and I've worked hard for you. And for a lot of us in this room right now, that's how we feel about God. I didn't drink, smoke, chew, or date guys that do. Like, I've done everything right, Jesus. I showed up every Sunday. Isn't that enough for you? No, Rachel, you're lost. Because what matters most is the relationship with God, why you do what you do. And if you do it because you think that now God will owe you something or God will depend on you to carry and hold up the kingdom, then you are sorely mistaken, right? Like, my kids are 11 and 14, and one of them remarked the other day, Mom, you know what? You're going to really feel my absence when I go off to college and you have to empty the dishwasher yourself. And I'm like, oh, heaven, I'm so afraid. Oh, the work. And that's like what the elder son was saying to God. I've been out here in the field. Don't you know how important I am to you? Yes, I mean, it's wonderful you're emptying the dishwasher. But what I care about is my love for you and your love for me. That you are my son or my daughter, my child. I want that relationship. That's what matters. And sometimes we're so good, especially in Methodism, we're so good at like doing good for others. That's great, that we forget the why. We forget why we're partying, why we're celebrating. And we don't go out and find lost people. I mean, heaven forbid we tell someone outside of church that like we love Jesus. That scares us, right? In fact, I shared data yesterday at the District Learning Day that 70% of people who do not go to church, 70% have never had a Christian tell them about God or faith. So we have some work to do, right? And as older siblings in this story, it can be hard to go and find people and love them so that we can have a party someday. And I'm really grateful that when I graduated from seminary, the bishop in Virginia said, congratulations, Rachel, we want you to start a church. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Why are we starting churches? We don't need more churches. Just give me a church. I want a building and I want people. And the bishop said, well, we found 10 young adults to work with you. And I said, Jesus had 12 disciples, and I only get 10. Like, this doesn't seem very fair. First of all, I don't want to do this. I don't know how to start a church because I have to go find people because I don't have a building. I don't have a congregation. I don't have a bank account or a budget finance committee. So I had to follow the call of the Holy Spirit and just encounter people. And it changed my critical, grumpy, disinterested heart and has given me, people call me the Energizer Bunny, and it's because I fell in love with my call. I fell in love with this opportunity to help people who have felt like a total hot mess, who have come to themselves and not known how to get back home, to be a small part of that process of seeing them reconnect with God. One of the first stories that happened as I was starting this faith community, with these young adults, we had a Bible study and people invited their friends, and I was working with this one girl, and she came up to me at the end of our Bible study, and she was like, okay, I have a question. And I said, what's your question? She said, I've been reading the New Testament the way you told me to, and I know that Jesus died and rose again for my sins. I get it. But why does he die 4 times? And I said, I'm sorry, what? And she's like, well, he died in Matthew, and then in Mark, and then in Luke, and then in John. Like, I had to stop. Is he gonna keep dying? Like, what is this about? And guys, that's when the joy came, right? Like, that's when we had our party. And I said, you have no idea. I mean, think about it. If you have never been to church or never read the Bible, you would assume chapter 1 leads to chapter 2. what is a synoptic gospel, Rachel? So I got to unpack that for her. And she was baptized. She's still active in a Methodist church in Florida with her husband and 3 boys. But it was a party. And I still remember the joy of that moment as someone who grew up in the church and would never have even known to ask that question. There's this beauty and this privilege. Or, I ended up mentoring and starting a Bible study in a local jail for some women. And on Christmas Eve, they wouldn't let me in to serve communion. So I walked 2 women named Big Sexy and Muse through the process of how to host a Christmas Eve service in the jail for other women. Like the joy and the tears that we shared on our telephone call afterwards about how they felt free for the first time in forever changed me, maybe as much or more than it changed them, right? So my hope and prayer for us at Green Valley, for anyone who's a follower of Christ, is that we learn how to throw really great parties with really great people that we've met. And as Methodists, again, I'm tapping into history before I shut up and we're done. One last slide here, 4 pictures. Yes. Does anyone know who any of these people are? If you do, you're definitely going to heaven. I don't know. Huh? Oh, good guess. John Wesley is not up on this screen. Isn't that insane? So, not Suzanne. Oh my goodness, you know his mother's name. Okay, I have a book for you anyways. You're the closest. Okay, so when we talk about going out and reaching people where they are and sharing love with them, this is the history of the Methodist Church, okay? Last summer for 4th of July, I was in New York City. And being a good Methodist pastor, I made my kids go to John Street Methodist Church in the financial district, Wall Street. And so this woman up at the top corner, her name is Barbara Heck. And John Street, okay, anyone watch the musical Hamilton? Do you guys, The Room Where It Happened? Do you know that song? Okay. Anyways, Alexander Hamilton and The Room Where It Happened is right behind John Street. So John Street is where Methodism happened, but it was 30 years before Alexander Hamilton was in the neighborhood. Barbara was there. She was from Ireland, and one night she caught her brother playing cards. Playing cards. Does anyone around here do that? So she caught her brother playing cards and kicked over the table and turned to this dude over here, Philip Embry, and said, I know you're a school teacher, but I also know that you have been trained to lead small groups. So get something going, because the cards are not going to be sustainable here in my neck of the woods. So Philip starts the very first ever Methodist small group, because he was trained by John Wesley in Bristol. And that became the very first ever Methodist church in the U.S. And it was not a professionally trained clergy person that started it. It was Barbara who got things done and rallied the boys. And so then Philip reached out to this dude with the patch on his eye, Captain Webb, who was in the British military. He would preach with like a sword on his pulpit. Slightly intimidating, but again, not a trained pastor, right? A soldier. And so he ended up starting Methodist small groups in New Jersey, Philadelphia, Delaware, Baltimore, going out, finding people, throwing parties. And then this final picture over here is a place you can still go to today if you're ever on the East Coast. It's called the Strawbridge Shrine. It's in like Podunk, Maryland. But the very first baptism that happened in the U.S. in a Methodist context happened here in Elizabeth and Robert's kitchen. So he was a farmer. He was out, one day getting his work done, and Elizabeth, his wife, was in the kitchen with all the kids and servants getting ready. Someone stopped by, and they had a chat, and he was baptized right there in the kitchen and joined them for dinner. So sometimes we think, oh gosh, we want to grow and revitalize the church. Pastor Mary, fix it, do it. But I'm going to challenge you and say, God is calling you to get out there and to find these people, or to welcome them when they show up at your kitchen door for dinner, and invite them into a relationship with God. So I don't know what brought you here today, what your story is, who you identify more with, the older son, the younger son, something in between. But I can promise you this: if you open yourself up to fall in love with Jesus every single day, that love will carry you into places where you are a small part of the biggest and best celebration this world or the world to come has ever seen. Thanks be to God. Amen.